Hello, self-care for performers. Welcome to a little practice. I'm trying to do at least one. We'll see if I have the need or desire, inspiration to do more than one a week, but I'm trying to do at least one YouTube something a week. And then we have our monthly class and practice available to you over Zoom in the self-care garden. And additionally, there, I also have been doing printouts of whatever resource or resources I use from the day to read and some prompts for you to enter into your own self-paced practice. For today, what I'm finding seems to be really beneficial and seems to be connecting with you and helping me is to attune to something. Sometimes it's cards. For my daily embodiment series in December, we did the 31 days of embodiment. I utilized different books as prompts. Today, I think I'm going to come back to another book. It's one we haven't used yet. It's called The Power of Attachment: How to Create Deep and Lasting Intimate Relationships. And this is by Diane Poole Heller, PhD. And the foreword is by Peter A. Levine, PhD. And Peter A. Levine is the person who coined somatic experiencing as a sort of methodology, which is one of the somatic body-based therapeutic models and practices, which is really about learning to work with the body in a trauma-informed way. I have an interesting relationship with trauma and the body, in which case some of my experience in my own body, what tends to happen is that the part of the outside witness that's wanting to keep my body feeling safe, that part of my body is saying, stop it. And I need to be the person watching the experience, not you, which is interesting. So there's a flip side to my personal integration of somatic experience, that like my body, the depth of my soul, wants to be the witness, as opposed to being witnessed and judged and then articulated and contained or titrated with, or like spent time with. It's like, no, stop it. Like, you are doing it's the wrong order for what my body, in the time that my body is working right now. That seems to be the story that's going on inside of my personal internal system. So I think that also I have my Robin Hood mug today. I've had this since I was a little girl. And you love it? On the other side is Maid Marian. So cute. Anyway, if any of you like Disney movies, then you might enjoy this mug. But this is a relic from I don't know, 80s or 90s or something. Okay, but we're going to do what we've done in the past, which has worked really nicely, which is attune to the medicine of the book, attune to the space between you and I, the individual you and I that are in this point right now. There is, of course, the greater wide seas of the internet, and people may or may not catch bits and pieces of things, and you also may catch bits and pieces of things. But what I'm really wanting to do is attune to a you and I out there in the world, where there is a sense of connection to a desire to be with the wellness of our own sense of self underneath all the hurts, and coming into connection with that and letting that be the witness of the experience that we are going to dive into. So I'm just going to breathe a couple of times, and then I'm going to turn to a page. If you want to attune to your needs and allow anything to bubble up for you that feels potent and timely for this particular energy that we are tuning into, tapping into, that's available to you as part of your own practice, relational instinct. And then I just felt a little flush and flood through the face. So I'm going to utilize that as a sign to open, and whoop, it opened right to this page. That could be either because I was really interested in this page when I first read it, or it actually felt like that. It felt more like a opening in the book as opposed to my instincts finding the time. But that felt right today. So we are going to work with it. So we opened up to what avoidant attachment looks like. And I've been doing a lot of avoidant attachment dancing lately. I have a disorganized attachment. If you're not familiar with attachment style, you can look that up. Just Google search attachment style or attachment theory. And depending on who's talking about it, they might have different kinds of labels, but basically there's secure attachment and insecure attachment are sort of like the two ways we think about it. Secure is like you have a secure base. It's the child who had a secure home, secure relational dynamics, at least like, I think it's something like 80% of the time or something like that, 70 to 80% of the time. We're pretty forgiving as little kids. We have that at least most of the time, then we start to feel good going out, exploring, coming back to our nest or our parents or our caregivers, our home, and we can go explore and come back and regulate, go explore, come back and regulate. And so that's a healthy dynamic of attachment system. That's what I'm hoping for self-care for performers to provide for those of us who either didn't have that before or need more of that now while braving the waters of the performing arts or creative career or just socializing as different kinds of roles that we're asked to play and participate in within the world at large. We can go try those on, come back, regulate, come back to ourselves, etc. Right? And then there's the insecure attachment. And depending on how you are thinking about this, predominantly they have different names they can go by, but there is anxious, which is like, I need you, tell me that you're there, I want you. And there's avoidant, which is like, whoa, don't get too close. Right? And then there's this disorganized, which is me, which is like, come here, no, go away, come here, no, go away. Like, I can't figure out the, like, when there's a lot of chaos in our early childhood and we have both a really secure connection at times, but then it's erratic and not always reliable. For some of us, that was our case in our early childhood. And that is one of the reasons that might lead to a disorganized attachment where you can't decide which one you live in. And there are different additional ways you can talk about things. There's like fearful avoidant, which I think I could be wrong, but I think that might be disorganized attachment. I think fearful avoidant and disorganized might be the same thing. I have to double check that cross-reference. It's like ballet. I don't know if you ballet dancers out there. It's like, is it Shaketi or Vaganova, or is it the French school? Like which, and is this word, does it work for all of them? Or is it different is the same move called something different in each school of ballet? It does a little bit of that kind of thing for me, which is hard for the way in which my mind goes. I really like things to be consistent and easily digestible if I'm going to engage with it. Otherwise, I get like lost in the weeds a little bit and have to like delineate, well, where did that split come from and how did it get there and what happened then? And I get lost into a hyper focus, you could call it, of trying to find out things like that. But for today, I'm going to release that a bit, and we're going to talk about what avoidant attachment looks like. Detached, off in their own world, insensitive, cold, standoffish, lone wolf, workaholic. Ding, 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 ding. Check any of those off. Either you or someone you love that you wish was closer with you. These are just a few descriptions we typically associate with avoidant people. But let's take a closer look at how the avoidant adaptation manifests itself, especially in adulthood, as well as some of the reasons behind these expressions. Relational discomfort and isolated sense of self. Let's see how long this section is. Ooh, that's kind of long. Okay. We're not going to read all of this. Relational discomfort and isolated sense of self. So I'm going to talk about what I think might be in there, but get the book if you want to look more into it. It's a fantastic book. I do really recommend it. I'll leave a link down below. But relational discomfort. So you're uncomfortable in relationship. There's something about relationship that feels uncomfortable for you. There's discomfort there. I get that. I have that. I'm figuring out how to work that out with you. An isolated sense of self. Like I have an isolated sense of self. That's my protection. I like it. I enjoy it. It's helpful. It's how I'm able to intermittently come into connection with others is through sort of isolated sense of self first. So a sense of self-care, care about myself in a contained way. And then hopefully this is where I think self-care for performers is coming into, because in the performing arts industries and fields, we do run into a lot of toxicity or wounded child personas or our own sort of complex trauma coming out to play, right? I think it is really important that we do have a sense of containment and personal identity, which isn't necessarily the same thing as a completely isolated sense of self. And this may or may not be you. This may or may not track for the therapeutic model. But what I find for me is sometimes if I go into isolated sense of self, it helps me find safety and orient and like de-escalate my internal discomfort and dysregulation within the context of relationship. And then I'm able to be like, okay, how do I want to relate what can I relate through? Is there a relationship that I even want? And I'm working on that piece. And there is, because I also have the ancient, like, I just want relationship, but I'm working to like bridge the space between the two. Maybe you relate to that. Or there's also something called the anxious avoidant trap, which happens a lot in romantic relationships, but I think also happens a lot in performance dynamics too. It's like, well, I just want to be with you or work with you, or can't we just work this out? And someone's like, no, get away. And then they create this space and they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's safe to come into connection again. And oh, come into connection. No, 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 go away. Right. There's like this rubber band effect that happens, like anxious avoidant trap, that's called. Okay. And then we go into dissociation. Oh, I have so much of that happens that I'm realizing over the last couple years. I would often continue pretending like I was relational with someone while I was completely dissociated, had no idea what was going on in the conversation, was not tracking anything, was completely split, was in like this like haze of a thing, but was able to pick out enough of like their body language or social cues where I could like, or oh, or in moments I'd be like, you're dissociating, catch a word, and they'd say something, and then I'd ask them a question about that word, but was not connected at all to the conversation, to the experience, to the anything. And the fact that I managed to get through all of my elementary school, middle school, high school, and college while experiencing that not only in relationship with people, but widely within class, and then just I figured out how to utilize skills like how to use the index in the back of the book to find the thing that I know that I didn't hear in class, and how to get really good at like sourcing through quick information to get to the answer so that I could still show up and execute the thing. And while that's a skill set I recognize that could probably be a high monetary exchange for people who want to be able to do that too, what I feel most drawn to, called to, spiritually guided, and asked to do is to be like, what if it wasn't about just coping and strategizing your way through that? What if, and this may or may not be everybody, but how beautiful if some of us can find a way through this way? What if? You ready for it? What if there's a way we can come into the core underlying needs of ourselves and one another, and then we don't have to find a way to strategize our way through something quite so harshly while letting so much go along the way? What if we could be in our heart and the depth of our sense of self, and then be relational from there? And what I've found that for me, and this might not be for you, when that happens, there'll be an invitation of like a channeling experience where energy or energies or inspiration or ideas, or even like very specific kinds of consciousnesses that desire to have a voice, I can create space and willingness in parts, or sometimes in the expanse of my body, depending on how I'm doing it, to be expressive from there, to be able to give witness to what wants to come through. And can be a bit of a slippery slope, because we don't want to just willy-nilly give our bodies over to whatever wants to come through. However, I do find that those of us who have a propensity to be interested in this kind of connection might already be having that happen and not know how to control it. So you might have a lot of experiences where it almost feels like I don't know what happened. I almost feel like I let go of the reins and everything just worked out, or I let go of the reins and everything just fell apart, or we don't really know how that's working. So part of what I think self-care for performers for me too is to really be in that creative channel, to really understand it a little bit more, not necessarily for everyone and how it always works, but for our own individual bodies and how it works for us. And I share a bit about what it's like for me, but what it's going to be like for you might be very different. And along the way, this was a challenge for me. I had a lot of friends from very different backgrounds and walks of life throughout my whole life. And this has included different religions and spiritual practices, from the full gamut of the everything and the all. And what I was finding I felt like I couldn't get through a certain degree was there's the historical context, some of which I knew and some of which I knew, but like I hadn't really like realized the impact in my like, and how it's gone through the ages and how we've been looking at, I'm going to pause there. So I hadn't realized the impact to the degree of which how Christianity has and continues to really disallow the kind of work that I do in very core ways. So there was a hard point for me to really be like, oh, wow, I may have a lot of people in my life who do practice relating to religion in a certain kind of way that is very specifically targeted against allowing themselves or having people in their lives do what I do. And am I really being authentic about myself? And am I really allowing them to have free will and choice in engaging with me if I'm in the closet about how I practice? And that's scary. And I mean, and ultimately that also has meant for me to really research, well, what do I practice? What do I align to? And I really realized how much like, okay, so the socio-political implications, like you can call it other things or you can take a name off and maybe you're not so scared of it and that's fine. But a lot of what I practice has more taboo words associated to it as far as like the structural, spiritual kind of connective point onto how I'm working with energies. I'm not going to say them today, but I have in the past. And if you're curious, we can have private conversations about it. But for the course of today, because when I start going into that, I lose some of the energy I want to bring into our connection today. So if you are a practicing Christian, you might not want to continue forward. And if you are of Abrahamic religion kind of concepts, test your waters and know this might not be for you. And for others who might practice in more nature-based ways, in more ways that are rooted to your ancestral lineage, pre-colonial, wherever from the world that is, right? Because colonizations happened everywhere. including what is now the main colonizer, the white Eurocentric kind of concept, that grouping of individuals also at some point colonized themselves, right? Like there was something that happened there. So you can go back to the roots. And I have Irish, Scottish lineage on mine, and there's a lot of challenging and painful histories there that are a part of my sort of psychological, ancestral, and historical collective trauma that will come up in flashes for me sometimes. For a while, I was thinking, oh, it's past life regression, it's this, that, and the other. And it's not, I'm not saying that it's not that, but what I'm finding is helpful for me as a framing, as a grounding rod to connect into the work that I need and want to do with self-care for performers is to be like, it's religious trauma. And I also have to be really clear in my sense of self that like there are certain ways of looking at energy dynamics and the concept of what divinity or source is, that is with that capital God, that is very much my abuser and has been my ancestors' abuser, and maybe yours too. Likely, I mean, the way I think about it is everybody's in this world. And you might vehemently disagree with that. And that is your prerogative. And that's okay. But I need to set a boundary there for myself around my personal connection to what I find safe inside of my experience. And so that is one of those things. So with a grain of salt and with invitation, and like if you're like, no, but you want to work through it, you're welcome to stay and watch, like be a part of it and incrementally see if there's still something here for you. And you might decide, no, absolutely not. And you might not decide, and that's okay too. And you might incrementally feel like some of it is for you and maybe not all of it, or maybe you can't get over certain aspects. That's okay. And maybe you also are like jamming with this and like, thank goodness someone's saying it. I get that sometimes too. And that's so nice when that happens. But we're just going to kind of brush off the rest for now, not enter into that very direct conversation in this moment, and know that doesn't mean it's not there. Okay, so that was dissociation. And now we have an exercise. Practice joint attention. We're going to do this today. Those of us who grew up with the avoidant adaptation usually prefer parallel attention activities when in the company of others that don't involve their participation. Playing video games or watching movies, for example, this means that there's very little interaction or mutual engagement while we both participate in the activity at hand. Oh my gosh, I love doing that. Like it feels really comforting for me. I really like it. Okay. So the suggestion here is to try a joint attention activity covered to some degree in the previous chapter, which I'm not going to go into today, but we'll know that. We can flag that. If you're interested right now, I am in this is chapter 2, avoidant attachment. And this is on page 64. So chapter 1 would have been where it was first referenced. Choose something that will help you include the other person in your experience as it unfolds, whatever it is, dining out, hiking, going for a scenic drive, or visiting a museum. Do your best to connect with your partner or friend as you experience the activity together. Hang in there long enough to find out how doing such a thing can actually nourish you. You don't have to make a continuous effort for the duration of the outing, but try your best to be a little more interactive and communicative than you normally might. Okay. So we're going to know that that can be your exercise. Today we're gonna do some sort of an embodiment around that. Okay. I'm gonna take out my hair because I like to. I feel like sometimes with the hair down, for me, I can feel more attuned to the ethers. And yeah. Da, 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 da. I am now, what is this exercise called? Practicing joint attention. So I think this means like we're both so I'm gonna do this here now with you. I am now practicing joint attention with self-care for performers. Okay, so this is me with you. Oh. And I just want to be like, we're just gonna take some pliés together. And this is me also, I think, like dance teacher. Maybe why I can't stand teaching so much is because of all the joint attention is hard for me. And I also simultaneously, like, if I'm gonna do it, I need it like there. Like I like really need it there. Like if we're gonna take a couple pliés, I want you with me. And I want it to not only be joint attention, but I want it to feel like we're breathing like an amoeba together. I don't know that amoebas breathe, but I think you know what I mean. And so I want to be in this space where I'm inviting you to practice joint attention with me as well. And maybe this is just let's stand up and let's mirror each other. So if you're over there, you want to mirror me. I can't see you, so I don't know what you're doing, but maybe at some point I'll imagine. I am taking gentle pliés and softening my foot pads. My hands are in front of me because I'm scared of you and I kind of want to feel the distance. But if we're going to mirror each other, maybe I'm going to move this hand over this way. You can mirror me. This is my left. It might be your right. I don't think it flips the screen. But I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it's both my left and your left. So we're just going to mirror each other. You're just going to practice following along. And this actually, mirroring is one of my favorite tools for physical theater that I love, love, love. It was one of my first, like, oh, I could do this forever. You can get into this sort of like trance space with the other person where one person's leading, one person's following. And now I'm going to follow you. I don't know what you're doing. This is me assuming that I'm listening to the space between us, and this might not be what you're doing. So you might still actually be following me, but I feel like I'm following you in my imagination. I'm sort of leaving space, empty space in my body, and I'm listening to the pulse and the magnetic sort of experience I have between myself and the screen. And now we're both gonna follow each other at the same time. We're both gonna see if we can be in a sense of following. I'm following you, you're following me. Is there a space where it becomes the same thing? And I know this is like on a recording, probably not. I don't know that this actually works, but you can utilize this exercise in the company of somebody that you want to be in practice with. Yeah, okay. So that's our mirroring exercise today. I think that's it. We're going to keep it simple. I do want to read, for some reason, this little experience right here that says, If your partner is avoidant, you might notice things they do unconsciously and unintentionally that create distance you would like to bridge. For example, two friends, Dee Dee and Shelly, often walk around the city together. Shelly always walks ahead of her friend. Oh my God, all of my boyfriends always used to walk. Like I couldn't keep up with them and they wouldn't wait for me. And I'd be like, I can't move that fast. And they'd be off and not noticing I wasn't there. There was a time where I was like, is he going to notice that I'm not with him? Nope. 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 I tend to be avoidant and then like avoidance, but I have that disorganized. So I also kind of at times am close enough. I keep wanting connection, but I like people who distance me. So weird. I like it. It makes me feel good. I'm like, oh, good. I'm not the one distancing. They're the one distancing. I'm not the avoidant one. I am also avoidant, disorganized, but I'm not the avoidant one. They're the avoidant one. And we never get close enough to me to feel my my avoidance kick in. I always get to be in the I'm secure, or maybe I'm pretending like I'm not feeling anxious or pretending like I'm not feeling avoidant, but their experience is enough that I'm masked secure. Not always, but this is a very specific thing that I consciously am aware of in my history. And I think that not only in my dating life, but also in my life as a performing artist, where I think there's something safe about you go to auditions and you don't know, you have to just let it go. Well, I can't care that much anyways. And then I don't have to be faced with what happens if it's time for me to actually show up to something. Well, it's hard to get a role. It's hard to get a role. Well, I don't know that I actually want one once I have one. I mean, I both do, but there's a lot of discomfort that happens relationally with myself in that process. And it's really scary. Yeah. And then I don't want to appear like I'm needy or graspy or chasing. And so I try to curb that. So I try to curb both. And then I end up in this space where it's okay. But I also internally do experience emotionally under the surface of things, both of those. And so I want to see if I can be with the heart of them, not just practice the middle like I have done a lot of in the past, but also be with the heart of why they're there and be what's the need that you have that's going unmet? Can we come into connection with that underlying secret self, that unhurt part of ourselves? Is that available in both of those parts and pieces? And I found for me, yes, it's not always comfortable to get there, but yes, there is. And there is something that usually I'm wanting. And at the end of the day, I find that for me, it's often connection, safety, belonging, trust that things are going to be okay. All these things which in essence, I realized too, as much as I was saying Christianity, no, those things are things that it pretends to provide, right? So it's not that I don't want to be get out everybody and all concepts of everything to do with this religion, even though there are times when I feel that way. But the more I've actually done that, the more I've been oh, those pieces of it, they make a lot of sense. Now that I'm get out completely because you're hurting me, stop. And I want to say, and there are a lot of us that have phantom experiences of feeling like there is something around our neck. And I've had that my whole life. And I can't wear turtlenecks. I start to get nauseous and it feels really terrifying. I didn't want to go into all of this. Maybe we'll cut that out. Maybe we won't. I don't know. But I want to contain it. Know it's there, not pretend it's not there, but also find a different way to work where that's not impinging upon my ability to be in creative flow, my ability to be with the unhurt parts of myself that are underneath these anxious and avoidant spaces, right? Oh, okay. Now I need to clear that. Let's clear that. Okay. Deep breath in. Exhale and just push away anything that feels like it's a vestige of harm and suffocation and overwhelm. And breathe in just as much as you can. So it's like getting in air where you can to push enough out so that you feel safe. This is for me what I need to do. This is where I was talking about the like isolated self. It's not necessarily that I want to be and stay isolated. It's just that there's so much like gunk that's not me, that's inside of my system and my field that I need to clear it out. And theoretically, once I do this, and actually, once I do this in my history, because I've done this kind of practice for a lot of years, if I am doing this kind of practice and I'm doing it effectively, then I become much more relational with the outside world in a way that feels like an honest secure, not a masked secure, not pretending that I'm secure, but actually secure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for being here with me today. I am enjoying this time we have together. I'm incrementally feeling safer and safer coming into this dynamic with you on the other end of this. And thank you to those of you who've reached out and expressed your gratitude and your appreciation for what we're doing, or the synchronicities in our paths and how some of what I move through is very similar to where you're at or what you've been moving through. That feels really good to hear. I think there's a lot of collective content that some of us are working through on a very personal and deep layer. So I think that there's so much in that practice and experience that can bring us together collectively in a really meaningful way, so we don't feel quite so alone while working in maybe ways that we don't see modeled as much as we would have needed earlier on in our life. And how beautiful it is that we get to be a part of that now as leaders or guides or teachers, or even if you're still in the student realm and you are practicing in this way and allowing it to be there. That's a really hard place to be because you are structurally in a kind of old paradigm, and there's a lot of complexity there. And maybe at some point I've been working on my podcast. I've been editing it and I've picked an episode where I'm like, okay, I think I'm less terrified of this particular episode as far as like judging my experience or being afraid of like the dynamic and that relational discomfort that I have. There's still like, I'm very excited. There's some talking over that happens, but I think it's going to be really good. So I'm working on a particular episode with a dance teacher, colleague, friends, relational gift of a human. I'm nervous while I'm telling you this. I am looking forward to being in a place where I feel ready to release that. I don't want to rush myself. I really want to do it where it feels good and it doesn't feel like just ripping off the band-aid and like walking away, which is what I could have done for a lot of these episodes. And maybe at some point I will come into a place where I'm grounded enough for the overall arching component of it, where I'm able to just kind of make and share, but that it doesn't feel like I am hurting myself to get through to the other side. I don't want to do it that way. I was the kind of person that when I had a band-aid, I would take the time to one by one hair at a time, be with the small incremental pain. I didn't want it ripped off because the after experience, it would last like all day. Like the pain of that got ripped off and it hurts and it would be really durational. But if I would spend more time and I take my time one by one, picking off the band-aid little by little on each little hair follicle or little sticky moment, then when I was done with it, my arm didn't hurt and I would the rest of the day be okay. And that's sort of the approach that I've been taking with self-care for performers in this way that's been so gripped and terse for me. Not all the time. Sometimes it's been beautiful, but overarching, there's a fair degree of me that is in that insecure attachment stage where I'm both anxious around something, but I'm also very avoidant of something else. It's very very terrified and protective. I feel very protective. Yeah. But that's also, I want to be like, okay, but what if it's okay to be protective? I don't have to be like, Gollum, it's mine, precious, right? But I can be like, this is something valuable that I want to protect, is worthy of protection. It could grow into this really beautiful thing, like treating it more like sacred, and that it's not because it's mine, it's because like it means a lot and I want to give it the space to be safe and trust that the boundaries, the borders, the clarity, or the containment or expressivity of it is done in a way where you won't get metaphorically shot out of the sky. Hopefully. We'll see. Thank you for being here. We can't always control certain things, and society has a lot of trauma and a lot of traumatized people. And that's hard, especially as performing artists, because we go out to tell our stories of trauma as traumatized people for traumatized people. And there are a whole myriad of different ways that can be both healthy, healing, and also really hard and sometimes magnetize experiences. And I don't want to say it like magnetize, like you magnetize it, so it's your fault, but in the sense that like sometimes there is a dynamic that will happen that can be a perpetuator of additional harm for ourselves, or even sometimes the stories we tell and who they reach can hit a psyche in a certain way that's not what they needed. And so it's a tender thing, these dreams we tell, these lives we live. So from that tender point, I think I just want to invite you into your heart, take a deep breath, and then we'll close. Deep breath in. Okay, until next time, see you later.